and welcome to episode 39 of Poetry Worth Hearing, hosted by me, Kathleen McPhillamy, and with music by Alex Heen. The theme for this episode was Other Spaces, which for me includes the possibility of entering other spaces through translated texts. So I'm very pleased to include Ben Bollig and Mark Leech's introduction to contemporary Argentinian poetry, and specifically the work of Sergio Raimondo. Other poets include Dinah Livingstone, Maureen Jivani, Martyn Crucefix, Kate Young, Jane Thomas, Michael Klimeš, Trisha Broomfield, Helen Overell, Lizzie Ballagher, Zachary Thraves, Terry Jones, and Sue Wood. You can find details about these poets and their publications on poetryworthhearing.biz. Ben Bollig teaches Spanish and Latin American literature and film at St Catherine's College, Oxford. Mark Leech is a poet and editor, also based in Oxford. Mark and Ben have worked together to translate the poetry of Sergio Raimondo, widely acknowledged as Argentina's most important and influential contemporary poet. Mark and Ben will tell you more themselves, and further information about all of them, as well as their publications, can be found at poetryworthhearing.biz.
My name is Ben Bollig, and I teach Spanish and Latin American literature and film at St Catherine's College, Oxford. I've written a number of books about Argentine poetry, including politics and public space in contemporary Argentine poetry, and modern Argentine poetry, displacement, exile, and migration. I've published translations in journal and as books, including Cristian Aliaga's The Foreign Passion, and with Mark Leech, Sergio Raimondo selected poems in 2023.
I'm Mark Leech, and I'm a writer and editor living in Oxford. In addition to translation projects with Ben, I've published various chapbooks of poetry, including London Water, Changan Poems, and Borderlands. I've also worked on translations of Old English poetry, which were published as Anglo-Saxon elegies. My short stories appear intermittently on my blog Into the Words.
The poet we're going to talk about today is the Argentine writer Sergio Raimondo. Sergio's writing emerges from a very specific literary and political context, Argentina at the end of the 20th century. Poetry writing and publishing has surged in Argentina since the 1990s, in spite or perhaps because of economic and political crises. Young writers, innovative styles, independent publishers, and new forms of circulation all emerged. Whereas in the 1980s there was a reaction against social, committed, or militant writing, much recent Argentine poetry demonstrates a return of the political. Poetry in Argentina still has a political weight, in a way that perhaps seldom persists elsewhere. Examples might include the human rights activism of poet Juan Gelman, who lived between 1930 and 2014. Also, poets' presence alongside senior politicians at international cultural events such as the Frankfurt Book Fair. Government policies during the Cristina Fernández administration from 2007 to 2015 that promoted poetry in schools. We could also list the role of poetry in First Peoples, in particular Mapuche, activism in the South, particularly with the publisher Espacio Hudson, or the work of poets as activists and educators in prison literature workshops, like the Je no fui, or I Didn't Do It project. In the 1990s, a generation of poets emerged who wrote in and who promoted a style that stripped away any metaphorical or descriptive excesses, instead using colloquial language and quasi-cinematic techniques like close-ups, cuts, and establishing shots to create poems that presented objects and sought, as far as possible, an objective point of view, devoid of personal impressions and sensations. Raimondo, along with Martín Gambarota, Martín Prieto, and Daniel García Elder, was central to this tendency as one of the poetas mateístas, or mate drinker poets. He published in the influential poetry newspaper Diario de Poesía and other related magazines, and worked with Vox and other small presses and poetry groups in Bahía Blanca, writing essays on the works of other contemporary poets. There was a strong political element in these choices. This was stripped down, immediate poetry that responded to an era the late 1980s and 1990s in Argentina, characterised by neoliberalism and executive excess under President Menem, the era of pizza and champagne in the presidential residence. From an economic point of view, publishing poetry is a disastrous idea, even in poetically engaged Argentina. Many poets at least partly fund their own publications. There are few paying readers. Poets don't buy each other's work as they expect to swap books. But here, the critic Luciana Di Leone perceives something important, what she calls the demonetarization of literature and poetry. That is to say, a certain degree of autonomy from the capitalist system, enabling a more effective critique of the contemporary world, precisely as we will see in Raimondi's poetry. Sergio Raimondo is widely acknowledged as Argentina's most important and influential contemporary poet, with an international reputation in and beyond the Spanish-speaking world. His books include Poesía Civil, Civil Poetry, from 2000, and Lexicon from 2022. His poetry has been translated into multiple languages, including English, German, Dutch, and Mandarin, and he has been the recipient of many awards, including the Guggenheim Fellowship in 2007. Poesía Civil, or civil poetry, marks a watershed in his country's poetry. Born in Bahía Blanca, a port city south of Buenos Aires, one of his first books was a funny and often quite filthy translation into contemporary River Plate Spanish of Catullus. He led the city's Ingeniero White Museum, an influential oral and political and popular history centre surrounded by industrial plant and agro-export depots. In the early 2010s, he became Director of Culture for the city before returning to university lecturing and to complete his epic encyclopedia in verse, Lexicon. These experiences, finding poetry in unlikely places, reading popular culture in the context of geopolitics, inform all his writing, in a fashion similar to that of Jean Sprackland or Tim Cresswell. Sergio Raimondi's work is at once shaped by literary tradition and craft and highly public and politicised. It engages in the most complex issues of his time, including globalization, colonialism, industrialization, and the degradation of our environment. All are rigorously analysed through the medium of the poet's art. His poetry may seem formidable at first because of the breadth of the allusions, the depth of research, the unsparing gaze, and the expert skill of the language. Many of Raimondi's poems address what might seem like unlikely subjects for poetry: industrial practices, global trade, or labour legislation. Yet there's also room for desert-dry humour, touches of self-deprecation, and immense empathy for the individuals caught up in seemingly implacable historical processes. And at the same time, the pieces are clearly marked as poetry by their visual shape, their syntactic alterations of everyday language, the measure of the lines, and changes in tone. It is this juxtaposition of the cold reality of the globalised world with the studied craft of the artist that gives his poetry its great power.
We're going to read some of Sergio's poetry now. We're going to start with a couple of poems from Civil Poetry and then a couple from Lexicon. Ben is going to read the Spanish first and then I'll read the English. And the first one is called The Minor Poet on the Birth of His Son.
El poeta menor ante el nacimiento de su hijo. Luego de hallar, tras días de búsqueda, el lápiz en la cabina del camioncito de los bomberos y de comprobar la independencia de juicio del heredero que rompe las páginas predilectas e intactas deja las indiferentes, el poeta menor decide dialogar con su mujer sobre un tema clave: la organización espacial y temporal de su labor en la casa luego del nacimiento del hijo. A lo largo de la conversación se tocan varios temas: compra de comestibles y artículos de limpieza, pago de impuestos, turnos para el cuidado, diversión, alimentación e higiene del niño, ausencia de cuidado, diversión, alimentación e higiene de la pareja, necesidad de registrar sus primeros pasos, frecuencia de uso del vulgarmente denominado chupete, amables formas de imponer distancia a los abuelos. Cuando una mutua mudez evidencia el final, el poeta menor comprueba que su inquietud ha sido desplazada en vista de otras urgencias. Esa noche, como un inspirado romántico que aprovechase el silencio de los mortales para dejar fluir el carácter al lado de sus versos, canta durante horas una canción de cuna.
The Minor Poet, on the birth of his son. Having found, after days of searching, his pencil hidden in the cabin of the toy fire engine, and having witnessed the independent judgment of his heir, who tears up the better pages and spares the indifferent, the minor poet decides to discuss a key matter with his wife: organisation of time and space for his work in the house after the birth of their son. This conversation touches on many topics: the purchase of groceries and cleaning products, the payment of bills, taking turns minding the child, ensuring fun, feeding and hygiene for the boy, the absence of that fun, feeding, care and hygiene for the two adults, the need to make a record of the child's first steps, the frequency of use of, to employ a vulgar term, the dummy, friendly ways of keeping the grandparents at bay. When a mutual silence indicates the ending, the minor poet understands that his concerns have been displaced by other considerations. That night, like an inspiration-filled romantic, taking advantage of silence among mortals to let flourish the winged spirit of his verses, for hours and hours he sings a lullaby. Our second poem is also from Civil Poetry, Nature is Not a Bank.
La naturaleza no es un banco. Aunque el haz cegado de trigo, a la luz última del día, asemeje su brillo al que tiene el oro, la naturaleza no es un banco, y la flexibilidad de la vara no admite metáfora económica ninguna, salvo cuando restalla. Y así las grandes cosechas favorecidas por la lluvia no alcanzaron allá por 1870 a amortiguar el déficit provocado por los importantes empréstitos firmados en Londres que habían permitido extender el crédito vacante con el que se había creído pagar la trilladora a vapor. Se importó para exportar, no para no importar más. Un año o dos sin nubes a la vista y la trilladora urgida de algún repuesto, y el número ingente de la deuda, blancos huesos, seco el junco del fisco junto al arroyo seco, una escena romántica, al azar del modélico destino liberal, que copia y copia, como la literatura de sus ociosos, mucho, mucho y mal.
Nature is not a bank. Although the cut wheat sheaves, in the last of day's light, seem to shine just like gold, nature is not a bank, and the suppleness of the stalk does not permit economic metaphor except when it breaks. And therefore the great harvests favoured by the rain were not enough in 1870 to amortise a deficit incurred through significant loans signed in London that enabled the extension of vacant credit with which they hoped to purchase the steam harvester. Importing to export, not to import more. 1 or 2 years without a cloud, and the harvester needing a spare, and the huge figure of the debt, the white bones, the dried-up reed of the bank by the dried-up creek, romantic scene at the whim of model, liberal destiny that copies and copies, like the literature of its chattering classes, much, much, and badly. Our next poem is also from Lexicon, IPA.
IPA. Quizá no sea una ocurrencia ocurrente, justo ahora en medio de los festejos, al borde de la pinta acercar la nariz, para notar en los aromas del lúpulo, responsable de la palidez amarga, característica peculiar de este sabor, la solución para que toneles y toneles, en las embarcaciones ya descargadas de algodón o fina seda, se cargaran en el muelle ribereño de la compañía monopólica de la nación propagadora de la concepción de libre comercio, soportaran el trayecto de 6 meses tras atravesar el ecuador matemático y lento circunvalar el cabo africano entre elevadas temperaturas y olas que de un lado al otro los desplazaban, llegaran al puerto populoso de Madrás, y en las gargantas resecas terminaran no de la desinteresada población local, sino de los burócratas civiles y oficiales del ejército del imperio atareados día a día en jugar al tenis o disparar sobre un elefante legendario sentados para hacer una concesión al exotismo, tigres surgidos de pronto entre tecas, y acostumbrar el paladar al curry o al arroz pilaf con sorbos de esta bebida hasta volverla tan habitual y necesaria que décadas después, ya de regreso en una metrópolis por siempre alterada, hubo gran demanda interna para llenar la jarra espumosa con que desayunaban a las 3, 4 de la tarde, aturdidos ante su color ambivalente y extraño.
IPA. Perhaps not an occurring occurrence, just now in the midst of festivities, to bring the nose in closer to the pint, to observe in the aroma of hops responsible for the bitter paleness, peculiar aspect of this flavour, the answer that meant barrels and barrels in the embarcations once unloaded of cotton or silk would be loaded on the riverside wharf of the monopoly of the nation that first propagated the ideology around free trade, would endure for the journey of 6 months via the mathematical equator, circumnavigating Africa's Cape among the high temperatures and waves that rolled them from one side to the other, would land at the crowded port of Madras, and would finish in the thirsty throats not of the disinterested locals, but of civil servants and officials of the imperial army, busy day to day playing tennis or shooting, sat on a legendary elephant as a concession to the exotic, tigers rushing suddenly from the teaks, and getting the palate used to curry or pilau rice by sipping from this drink until the habit's so necessary that some decades later, having returned to a metropolis forever changed, there was a great internal need to fill the foaming glass with which they breakfasted at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, stunned by its colour, ambivalent and strange. The last poem we're going to do right now is also from Lexicon, and it's called Mind Uploading.
Mind Uploading. De alcanzarse la tecnología necesaria para transferir, tras escanear las capas microscópicas del cerebro, la mente a un soporte tecnológico o avatar digital, y lograr librarlo así por fin del obstáculo del cuerpo, sería lógico que ese yo dedicara su tiempo interminable a hacer unas meditaciones filosóficas destinadas a mostrar las bondades de dejar afuera lo incierto y discordante de la razón geométrica. Ese orbe confuso de las impresiones múltiples provenientes de los sentidos siempre falibles del oído o el olfato, con su tendencia a estremecer la reflexividad del alma desde el reino de lo extenso. Pero tal como a aquellos a quienes se les amputa un brazo o una pierna, también podría suceder, aun en la mismísima eternidad del pensamiento, que de pronto insiste el dolor del pie ausente.
Mind uploading. If one had built the technology needed to transfer, after scanning the microscopic layer of the brain, the mind to a technological or digital state, and achieve its freedom at last from bodily hindrance, it would be logical for that, to give endless time to pursuit of philosophical meditations destined to reveal the benefits of putting aside geometric reason's uncertainty and discordance. That confused orb of multiple experiences deriving from the always fallible senses, of hearing or smell with their tendency to shake the soul's reflection from the realm of extension. But as for those who have lost to amputation an arm or a leg, it is also possible that in that self-same eternity of thinking, the missing foot would suddenly insist its ache.
Recently, Sergio has published a long poetic essay on the trees of Bahía Blanca. It's hard to summarise, but I wanted to share a text that I wrote in reaction to reading it before we then read an extract. In my hand, a copy of Raimondi's contribution to the forestry reconstruction plan for the Bahía Blanca municipality that arrived via Germany in a snug padded envelope with a postcard showing a Kafka sketch, the sleeve green, rough card, red on the back with a precarious silver ink. The cover shows the outline of trees and branches and possibly phone lines, like the photos in Wim Wenders's Perfect Days. And of course, what I have in my hand was once a tree. The book is a kind of delirium, not a plan as such, but an essay at once painstakingly researched and strangely freewheeling about the trees of Bahía Blanca. Tens of thousands were felled or damaged in a storm in October 2023. 13 people were killed, but trees cannot be counted with precision, or have not been. After the clean-up, various community and municipal initiatives set about replanting local and imported species. A tree is never just a tree, but a point in a network of history and society, and something that Sergio hesitates to call nature. He names dozens of species, some of which I recognise, some of which even looking up would be hard to translate, but more than that, he seems to know the stories and relationships around each tree. It's popular, following Eduardo Cohen and other decolonial theorists, to talk about how forests, and therefore trees, think. And Sergio does write about the brain of the tree and how its roots think. But more than that, the trees lost in Bahia give shade to couples, were home to parakeets, held soil in place, were a bit of forest inside the city. You could say that they did work, had been transplanted, had migrated, grew at strange angles because of the wind or the slope, absorbed the chemicals and contaminants from the huge industrial zone, Ingeniero White, the port. This is all gone. Sergio's response is not nostalgia or regret, though there is regret for loss for these old former companions. But in knowing all these trees, Sergio is trying to see the world as they do, as they did.
Extract from a contribution to the plan for a forestal reconstruction of the municipality of Bahía Blanca. It's enough to imagine what must have happened to a young member of the great colony of burrowing parrots that live in Bahía Blanca, which habitually go to roost at that hour of the evening on that branch of that eucalyptus in the Parque de Mayo, and who, the day after the storm, flew towards that branch of that eucalyptus at that hour of the evening without finding it. No matter how it flies, one way, then the other, flies up, now down, no, nothing, no, no. Did it doubt its sense of direction? Impossible to overstate the impact of that absence, all the more for a species characterised by the preeminence of custom, as reflected in their lifelong monogamous pairings or tendency to return, year after year, to the same nest, after they excavate it with claws and beaks in the fissures beside Avenida Cabrera. Our collaboration on these translations was based on our respective areas of expertise. Each of us would create a version of each poem, Ben's informed by his knowledge of Spanish language and literature, and mine by my experience of writing and reading poetry in English. Both were aiming, as far as we could get individually, towards a poetic translation that reflected the letter and the spirit of the text. We would then bring the two versions together and work over areas where we diverged. Each draft would go through numerous revisions, refining meaning, rhythm and sound, until the text reached its published form. Translating Sergio presents some interesting challenges. He uses formal metre, unusual syntax and extremely understated irony, all of which need to be conveyed in the English. He also often uses highly technical terms, one example of which had Ben consulting a 1930s Argentine manual on the maintenance of imported British steam engines. But above all, our aim was to bring the poems into English as windows into the interconnected, complex and always precise world of Sergio's writing.
The other translations that we've worked on together include the collection Bichos, or Beasties, by the Argentine writers Ezequiel Seidenberg and Mirta Rosenberg, in which Seidenberg creates a set of multiply rhymed, almost baroque sonnets about insects and other creepy crawlies, as an extended metaphor for the ups and downs of a youthful love affair, and Rosenberg, the experienced poet and a mentor to Ezequiel, comments, wryly, ironically, on his romantic excesses. And we're currently working on translations of the great poet of the Pampas, the self-taught nomadic wanderer, author of some 90 books of poetry, many of them unpublished and at one stage lost on his travels, Juan Carlos Bustriaso Ortiz.
Thank you for listening to our translations today, and goodbye.
Thank you so much, Mark and Ben. And remember, more information can be found on poetryworthhearing.biz. Dinah Livingstone's poem is both a translation and representation of a space which is very other. This version of the parting of Orpheus and Eurydice is translated from Virgil's Fourth Georgic. Both texts, the Latin and the English, can be found on poetryworthhearing.biz.
This poem, by the Latin poet Virgil, describes the parting of Orpheus and Eurydice at the river Styx, which forms the boundary between this earth and the underworld, which is another space. I'll read my translation. It's from Virgil's Fourth Georgic. Eurydice cries, "What has ruined us both? What madness has lost us? I am forlorn, Orpheus. Again they cruelly force me back, and sleep overwhelms my swimming eyes. Goodbye. I am carried away, wrapped in enormous night, reaching out for you with my helpless hands, which, alas, I can't give you." She didn't say another word, but vanished like smoke dissolving into thin air. She didn't see him clutching at shadows and wanting to say so much. The jailer wouldn't let him cross the marsh again. What could he do? Where take himself? For the second time his wife was gone. Could he weep or sing to alter the will of God or fate? On the river Styx now, she shivered in the boat.
Orpheus, in contemporary guise this time, reappears in Maureen Jivani's first poem. Her second, All at Sea, explores a different kind of space.
Orpheus in the overworld. He leaves the car door open, the radio on, moonlight playing, grabs the red carnation from the passenger seat. Under a black brolly, he crunches the gravel beneath his feet, races down the path bordering the church, and stops, touches the scratch of her name on a gate. It cuts his breath. He runs further on, past the cold stone walls of All Saints, and turns west towards the placating yew, church and tree, custodians now for an intimate space, and arrives at the plot in diminishing rain, only to find light skipping away like a young bride in a summer dress. All at Sea, after Adrian Rich. And I wanted to explore the wreck being me, in dread of the self, buried deep, murky and bruised. A ghost ship, and yet not a ghost ship, but the ghost of a ghost ship, a mothership lost in a space with miraculous fish darting in and out between its timbers, dodging bigger, meaner prey with their grated teeth and nerve. I learned of the wreck from a man of letters, his folded hands neat on his lap. I was sipping water at that time, which was no time, and time ahead of itself. It's true to say, he submerged me fully in my rubber suit, with my table of depths and my precious breaths. And as I descended, my spaces compressed, my mind compressed, the pain unbearable, heat draining from my gloved body. Suddenly, equilibrium regained. I found myself at the edge of the wreck, torch in hand, shining a light onto glittering treasures, drifting from a Gladstone bag. Scalloped bracelets designed in gold, little faces, pearlescent hands, so much stopped time.
I'm very grateful to Martyn Crucefix for recording 2 poems from his new collection, Our Weird Regiment, published by Shearsman Books.
Here are 2 poems dedicated to in remembrance of my mother. This first one is a version of a Bertolt Brecht poem written in 1934, which he called The Orange Cellar. This is much changed. On Southampton Street. A mizzling fog on Southampton Street. Then suddenly a market stall with its spectral blooms under a bare bulb preternaturally lit. A sullen, frizz-haired girl cutting stems. I'm dumbstruck, as one who's found the thing he was looking for, here, at arm's length, chrysanthemums. Nothing but them. I blow on stiff fingers, plunge them into a pocket for coins, but between fumbling silver and glancing back up to check the price scrawled on yellow card, it feels as if I interrupt myself. A dull under voice, lifted in bleak remembrance. Since last night, you're not here or any place. And my second poem also leans on another source. This poem, which I've called After St. Augustine, is a version of a prose passage from Book 3 of Augustine's Confessions. After St. Augustine. His mother walking, some straight and narrow, when before her this thinning man who smiles and waits, you'd think with joy, yet at second glance, sunk within herself, she's consumed with grief. Her boy son, asking the cause of it, say, why such sorrow? And it's not because he does not know. As in waking life, without missing a beat, she says, I'm crying for a son. He replies, oh, then take heart, because he must. Here on this pathway where we've met, here with these smiles, I am your son. She stares up and down and gazes along the narrow causeway where he's set her. And assuredly, she then explains, in my dream, I spoke with an angel who did not promise where my son was, there I might be. The angel promised, wherever I am, where I'm laid down, there he would be. He would come to me.
And now, still exploring the borders between this world and the next, 2 poems from Kate Young.
Coat hangers. When I open the mirrored door, I hear them jangle, loose-tongued, accusatory, skinny silvered shoulders rattling their disgust. I've denied them the warmth of wool, the soft drape of cotton, cashmere and silk. Too soon to clear clothing, I hear them chime. Light seeps in through a crack in the blind. A pale lace moon glares at black sacks, specks in galaxies of plastic. The wardrobe is weeping. I climb into its smeary face. The fit is tight, my face upturned. Inhale the scent of your passing. What are the chances? It must be 20 years. You haven't changed. Your skin remarkably unlined, hair still soft, auburn tinged. You are even wearing the same shade of cornflower as last I saw you, dressed up to the nines. I've considered this moment over the years, wondered if you would be here to welcome me. I'd expected a brief tangle with an aggressive tumour, a sudden aneurysm, like a thief caught red-handed, or perhaps a slow slippage through my octogenarian years, but no, in the end, just a van and a misjudged bend. You wave, you always waved in shops, parks, pubs, as if I wouldn't recognise you. We hug, shift into shadows.
Perhaps I shouldn't have been surprised at the number of poems about death and the border spaces on either side of death. The next poem is by Jane Thomas from her very fine sequence of poems about Alzheimer's and the death of her father.
Coracle Drift. At the edge of the river Styx, a frayed rope ravels away like a cream eel. Unclutched, coracle adrift, heading to where blue herons sleep. Rift wingbats drink dive. Unbodied moths test their wings thither into the light. Clipped silver under tongue, you follow dawn threads, weight gone, drifting in white willow space.
Michael Klimeš considers death and new life and the space between them.
The bridge that does not quite reach. I'm the only one awake, staring at the dark ceiling, between Dad who is dead and Celine breathing. I hold his hand that is stiff cold, and hers warm, everything to come. I do the sums, born 90 years apart, and art or dreams, whatever these words are, cannot help you meet. I cry not because I am your son and her father, but because I'm the bridge between that doesn't quite reach.
And, lighter in tone, but equally serious in theme, Trisha Broomfield on an empty space.
Grandad's red chair. Lift your feet, Harry, Nan orders. Beck's Bissell wheels squeak across the carpet. Sis and I stop fighting, stare at the empty chair. The worn red seat, still sporting a sheet from the Daily Mirror. Tell her, Sis nudges me, the elder. Nan, I summon up the words we've dared not use. What? I told you, move away, give your grandad some space. The carpet sweeper swallows crumbs of custard creams, bulks at cat hairs, spreads them flat on the leafy Axminster, a hand me across from Mrs. Price, one door down. Grandad isn't there. I grab Sis's hand. We shuffle back, stand at a safe distance, wait for the explosion. Right, Harry, when I've done this, if you would be so kind as to stop flicking your ash on me carpet. Nan lifts the glass ashtray from the side table, wipes away nothing. I'd have time to write me memoirs if you didn't make so much mess. Sis, emboldened, adds, He died ages ago, Nan. Nan fusses about, plumps cushions. There now. Don't get in me way, Harry. I've got dinner to sort. Peas don't shell themselves, unless you want to. The words hang in the air below the marbled glass light shade. Thought not. Nan's body, hot from its exertions, wafts Wright's coal tar, overtones of French fern. We stare again at the chair. Antimacassar yellowed with brill cream. Fox's glacier mince stuffed down the sides. Grandad's place has its own aroma. I don't think I can't see you two, Nan bellows from the tiled kitchen. Don't either of you dare sit on your grandad's chair.
No, for something different. This poem by Helen Overell.
Discovering the world. The wooden hut used for school assemblies. Dusty velvet curtains mark the raised stage, and on the wall opposite, a world map. Much of the land in pink, oceans in blue. A tapered wooden pointer poised, ready to tap its way on epic adventures. Follow lines of longitude, latitude. Shiver in Arctic cold, glimpse polar bears. Skip down to the ruler strait equator. Bask in sub-Saharan heat, keeping watch. Clatter pots and pans, shout to scare away crocodiles. Trace the blue and the white Nile into Sudan and find the meeting point, Khartoum. Our bungalow, slatted shadows waltzing to the clack of a ceiling fan. Here, in Abergavenny, Monmouthshire, in Wales, in the British Isles, the mountains, the Skirrid, Blorenge, Sugarloaf, stand guard.
Lizzie Ballagher's poem takes us back to the other world.
At Mort Stones. Below the warren, a woman wrapped in scarves walks her greyhounds in the cold. Today, they do not race the wind but hold fast to her heels, tails between legs. She hears in their throats a prickling growl, sees hackles rise and feels her own hair stand on end. Because beyond them all there moves a figure creaking in an awkwardness of armour, who stirs the strand with hefty sword, stooping to make an everlasting chain from grains of sand, a rope to moor him to the land forever, since he was cast adrift by Pope and Holy Church. Because he was one who raised his blade to butcher Becket on the stones, to smash his brains out on the floor, to slaughter him below the altar. So, to assuage his guilt, from now till stars fall from the skies he wanders, wades the shore, to make a mooring waves will wash away and wash away again.
Zachary Thraves takes us to a place he doesn't want to be in.
This is called Anywhere But Here. The clock burns as white gowns fly by, ghosts in the night. The clock burns. While in the corner, a small boy, clutching a serrated scarf like jeans distressed for fashion. The clock burns. A clipboard grabs me, explains the notes like Italian opera I'm trying to understand. The tears burn. The pendulum finds rhythm with my heart. I want to be sick. Plastic floor burns. Dreams fizzle out like rain on the black pane, lost in stolen memory. The clock burns. I tell myself, between gasps of breath, anywhere but here. The clock turns.
Terry Jones tantalisingly takes us to another space, but bars us, or tries to bar us, from entry.
Romford, revisited. You could find Gromford using Google Maps or the Ordnance Survey. How could you not? But then neither of us knew the name, even as we were strolling through it. Its earth banks, passing place, and single track. It was a walk we did the November that we knew, had reason to know, that never again would we accompany each other to this place, which was, to repeat, hardly a place at all. But today, this being another November, I troubled the narrow lane. I could swear, if that helped you to believe it, that her footfall echoed my own, and that a parallel channel was pushed through the leaf litter, and the wind carried the strain of her voice so faint. Shall I recommend that you visit Gromford? I would rather you stayed away. Plot the reference if you like. Let your finger touch the spot. Then wrap it up in the multiple folds of your magenta map and leave it there, unexplored.
And finally, Sue Woods reads a range of poems from her forthcoming pamphlet from Grey Hen Press.
I'm reading from my forthcoming pamphlet, Winter Journey, to be published by Grey Hen Press in March. The title poem is a sequence based on an account of a three-man expedition in the Antarctic winter to collect emperor penguin eggs for scientific study. Winter Journey. It was pitch black, one lamp for burning blubber, one lamp for burning spirit, one tent candle lamp, one blubber cooker, one blowpipe, 8 pounds of candles. Across the darkness 3 men stumble. It is so cold their teeth shatter. No moon lights their way. One holds a lantern up. They have enough candles for a month. Each night their clothing freezes into stone. Each morning they pummel garments back into service, harness themselves to sledges heavy with picks and gear, ice axes, an alpine rope, knives, a piece of green Wilson canvas, a 3-man harness. Total weight 757 pounds. Puttees, finneskoe, seine grass, hair stocks, 2 pairs of woolen socks. Our sweat froze and accumulated. It passed from our flesh to become ice. We were frozen into a pulling position. They carried a naked candle. 3 men frozen and a little pool of light drag on towards Cape Crozier, across the limitless barriers, twisted ridges 60 feet deep. Cherry, unable to wear his spectacles, being so near-sighted, is almost blind. Things must improve, says Bill. I wanted peaches and syrup badly, especially the syrup. Birdie had 2 tins of sweets. Sometimes it was difficult not to howl. We kept our tempers, even with God. Camp. First the stench, whale breath, thick with eel, char, cod. Slimed rock colonized to a feather's width, each bird house-proud, fierce. We lit a candle, held it up to the glitter of 1,000 eyes, then edged across an ice shelf overhung with flutes of ice. That night we boiled a bird, skimmed the oil from bloody water, lit a feast of lamps, remembered how the colours of light are trapped, like ourselves, in ice. Albatross, wind wanderer, so long at sea you have forgotten earth scents, the pale grass between 2 pebbles where you squatted with shabby wings over eggs, your birdwife greeting you, beak to beak. Wave skimmer, you dream on the wing, hold longitude and latitude in your easing heartbeat, the storm threading your wings' precision over and over, wave on wave. Well roads are your paths, alone. Your company is the dark cross of your shadow, a slipstream below on the ice-blue ocean. Your journey is on and on. Source. You said there were gold taps, shaped like dolphins, gasping for air. You said I was born by the river in a mansion because of the war. Now I push through Thames grasses, following the path to the river behind the old house. Listen for water that you sensed as green air, fretting the window, breathing depths and shallows, bird chatter, its lapping, gentle as cradle song. Today I catch up with myself, stop by the river, run my hands through its journeying, remember the tale you once told of golden fish leaping, a house full of echoes, an unseen river going its way, a great bath filling and emptying.
That's all for this month. A full and varied crop of poems. More details on poets, text of unpublished poems, and information on publications on poetryworthhearing.biz. I hope you've enjoyed listening.